Let me bring in Simon Calvert from No to Named Persons, and Simon has, expressed a vociferous opposition to this from the outset. Morning to you, Simon.
Good morning.
Good morning, and thanks for your patience. I know your time's limited now. Have you perhaps politicised this particular piece of legislation and ignored what is at heart a good principle?
No, I mean, let's just be clear. If this was just about multi-agency working, that'll be fine. Everybody wants that. There's not enough of that. And if it was just a service for the parents and the families that wanted it, that'd be okay too. But it's not, and it never has been. And there's also been a vast amount of confusion. But let's take stock. Let's look at public opinion. There's huge public disapproval of this scheme. So their views matter. And they are very often the parents, of course, who are most directly affected by this. So there's huge public opposition. Then you've got the Law Society of Scotland. They had criticisms about this from the beginning. They were ignored. Their concerns were vindicated by the Supreme Court. Last week, they were saying to the Parliament that those who have to implement this scheme, the named persons and others, will have to have a lawyer on speed dial. Then you've got the faculty of advocates who are saying that professionals and families are not going to want to share with professionals if it's not clear about which private information is going to be shared and when. You've got the Scottish Association of Social Workers. You just heard from Trish. Her submission used the word toxic.
Hang on. I have to clarify there.
She said some of her supporters regarded it as toxic.
What Tricia said was that they felt that some of the discussion around the legislation had become toxic, which is a different thing, which we appreciate. She also said that her members are split. That yes, there are some of them who think it should be scrapped, but there are others who feel that there is something worth fighting for here.
Well, you've got Dr. Gary Clapton and Professor Viv Cree who've made their submission to the Parliament, and they think that the government should go back to the drawing board on this. You've heard from from health visitors themselves. Remember, they are meant to be named persons, and they've expressed their concerns. You go back a year or so, and one of the health visitors' unions, I think it was Unison, actually did a survey of its members, and there was massive hostility to this. And you're just hearing more and more evidence from people saying this isn't going to work. The government won't listen.
Yeah, there are undoubtedly.
It won't make changes, and I think we've got to the point where it is just impossible for the Parliament to proceed with this.
Right. All I was going to say there, Simon, and I think it's in everyone's interest to try and sort of see both sides of this, because it's an important part of legislation. I mean, it will affect more or less every family in Scotland, and it's interesting that when we do this as a phone-in, we're not flooded with calls, I'll be honest. And, it's one that you would expect lots of people to be jumping in and wanting to be involved with, because it's going to affect nearly everybody. I don't know whether it is just too difficult to get your head round, because some of the conversations around it have just been so dense that it's difficult for people to really think, does this affect me or not? But it is an important piece of legislation that we need to feel that we've fleshed out. And you are mentioning many of the objections, and undoubtedly they're there. What Stephen Naismith is saying is we're not hearing the good stuff.
Well, I mean, but you're hearing from the professionals, like the Royal College of Nursing. They were saying they think that it will lead to a form of defensive practice. And you're hearing from health visitors at Unite who are saying there's a nervousness about it. These people ought to be listened to. And then there are the parents. Let's talk about the parents. Now,
I'd love to talk about parents. Can I just put out my phone number again? 08085 92 95 00. Carry on, Simon.
Well, no, quite right. There are many parents who are afraid. We get contacted by parents every week. And we get the stories from parents. Now, some of those stories are from parents who are just uncertain, and they feel that the named person themselves is not making clear where the responsibilities lie, and they are not building confidence. But some of these stories are heartrending. People who are in difficult situations where the named person's intervention has made it much, much worse, because some named persons have decided that this new responsibility, which isn't even statutory yet, So if it's difficult now, what's it going to be like when it's statutory? Some of these named persons have decided that their responsibilities allow them to intervene in intensely private personal issues in families' lives, like family breakdown. I've spoken to mums who are going through divorces, and the named person has sided with their partner and tried to intervene in arrangements for contact. What's that got to do with the named person? And why are they sharing information about that? I've heard from families where there have been accusations of criminality to do with the kids, sometimes false, sometimes correct. But again, the named person's involvement has just escalated and made situations like that much, much worse. And you've got to remember that when it comes to the information sharing, which is the most controversial part, it's the area where the Supreme Court was most scathing, the training that has been rolled out across Scotland for years now about private information sharing has been terrible. Professionals have been encouraged to view confidential data as there for the taking. And I can give the specific example of the bizarre training session in the Scottish Borders, where the council, a guy from the council, had people in front of him, and he said taxi drivers who give kids lifts to school will have a legal duty, he said, to tell the named person about any conversations they hear in the back of the car. That's the sort of level of invasion. That's in the Borders. But who said that? The trainer. I'll retrieve his name if you like, but he was a counsellor responsible for child protection, and that was the training that he was giving to people, to third sector people. That was the level of intervention that he thought the named person legislation required people to have.